You crave applause, not truth. And Nietzsche saw it long before it became the pandemic we have today. He watched men fold themselves into the shape of whatever the world seemed to reward. Obedience, likability, the illusion of moral virtue. And he didn't just criticize it. He called it out for what it was. A sickness of the soul. A slow rot wrapped in politeness. Because the man who seeks approval is not seeking to live, he's seeking to be permitted. And Nietzsche, the eternal challenger of comfort, could not stomach that. He called it slave morality, the kind of mindset that clings to praise like oxygen, that builds its identity not from internal conviction, but external validation. The weak man, Nietzsche said, doesn't really live. He reflects. He echoes, he adapts, not because he's wise, but because he fears the cost of standing alone. You see it everywhere now, in the way men shrink their voices when truth makes others uncomfortable, in the way they flood their profiles with curated softness, hoping to be seen as safe, in the way they perform allyship not out of conviction, but out of fear of exile, fear of being disliked, fear of being called dangerous. Nietzsche didn't admire safety. He admired strength. But not brute strength, the deeper strength. The kind that dares to say what others only whisper in silence. The kind that builds itself from the inside out, even when no one claps. Especially when no one claps. And so he saw these weak men, these approval-hungry souls, and he knew they are not dangerous. They are not courageous. They are not alive. They are polite corpses.
What made Nietzsche dangerous wasn't just his mind, it was his willingness to offend, to unsettle, to look directly in the mirror and say, this isn't virtue, it's cowardice dressed up as kindness. And weak men hated him for it, because he exposed the lie they were living, a lie where comfort is king and truth is negotiable, where masculinity is redefined to mean agreeable, not grounded, passive, not powerful. The man Nietzsche feared most was not the violent man. It was the man who had been so softened by culture that he no longer knew what he believed. He simply adjusted his beliefs to match the temperature of the room. And don't confuse this for rebellion. Nietzsche didn't romanticize the rebel who yells for the sake of noise. He respected the man who had wrestled with the chaos within himself and emerged with his own yes, even if the world said no. Because in that yes, in that internal affirmation, is something sacred. Will. The will to truth, the will to strength, the will to stand unshaken in a world that trades honesty for harmony. But modern men? Many of them have sold their will for a seat at the table. They censor their own thoughts before others can. They nod alone to lies just to be liked. And Nietzsche would ask, liked by who? By people just as lost as you? That's the great irony of the leak man. He built his worth out of the judgments of others who were just as hungry, just as unsure, just as afraid. It's a hall of mirrors. Each man pretending confidence, hoping someone else in the room actually has it. But no one does. Not deeply. Because deep confidence can't be borrowed. It has to be forged. And forging requires fire. Nietzsche understood that. That's why he wrote of the overman, not as a final destination, but as a process. The death of the herd-bound self, the rebirth of the sovereign soul. The weak man, by contrast, avoids the fire. He fears the death of the image. He fears rejection because he has no identity outside of it. But here's what makes this even more terrifying. Nietzsche saw that entire systems, religious, political, cultural, were built to reward this weakness. Because a man who constantly seeks approval will never rebel. He will never challenge the sacred. He will never rise. He will consume. He will obey. And he will call his obedience virtue. He will mistake his passivity for humility. He will even weaponize that humility, shaming men who do speak boldly, labeling them arrogant, toxic, dangerous, not because they are, but because their presence makes him aware of everything he's not. Nietzsche saw this as the inversion of values, where power was called evil and weakness was canonized as good. And it's still happening now. Look closely. We praise men for being agreeable, but punish them for being direct. We reward those who speak in euphemisms, but silence those who use precision. We worship comfort, and so we breed weakness. We raise men who apologize for their presence, for their instinct, for their power, then wonder why they grow bitter or numb, why they disappear into addictions, why they can't hold a boundary, start a mission, or lead without first checking if everyone's okay with it. The answer is simple. We taught them that approval is survival. And the result is a generation of men terrified to disappoint, even if it means betraying themselves.
But Nietzsche, ever the brutal mirror, didn't offer these observations with sympathy. He offered them with fire, because he knew the only way out of this sickness wasn't to meditate it with more softness or more understanding. It was to burn through it with truth, the kind of truth that hurts, the kind that leaves scars. He believed most men would never choose that path, because the weak man would rather be accepted in a lie than abandoned in truth. He'd rather be liked for who he's not than alone for who he is. But Nietzsche asked, what kind of life is that? What is the point of existing if your entire sense of worth is a reflection of someone else's gaze? That's what he meant when he said, become who you are. Not become what pleases others, not become what's marketable, become who you are. Not the polished version, not the digestible version, the real you, the one beneath the scripts, the one you buried to survive, the one who, if fully unleashed, might terrify the people who only liked you because you agreed with them. And yes, that man will be rejected, at first. But Nietzsche understood something modern men forget. Rejection isn't a curse, it's a filter. It separates the people who love your mask from the ones who might actually respect your soul. But that requires you choose something radical. Solitude. Not loneliness, solitude. The silence that comes when you stop performing, when you stop asking, do they like me? And start asking, do I respect me? And most men never ask that question because deep down, they're afraid of the answer. They suspect they've built their lives around applause, not alignment, around praise, not purpose. And that suspicion, once felt, is hard to unfeel. It gnaws, it haunts, because somewhere deep in the psyche, a voice is always whispering, you know this isn't you. You know you're still hiding.
Nietzsche didn't want men to be liked. He wanted them to be forged, to pass through fire and emerge willing to be misunderstood, mischaracterized, even hated, so long as they were true. Because that's the only kind of strength that lasts. Approval fades, audiences get bored, but inner alignment, that becomes an anchor, a weapon, a flame. And you see it in the rare men who have walked this path. They don't posture, they don't shout, but they can't be moved. Their truth doesn't change with the tides, and when they speak, people listen, not because they pander, but because their voice carries the weight of having walked through hell and come back whole. The weak man can't do this. He thinks truth is optional, as long as he's polite. He thinks masculinity is toxic, as long as someone online says so. He confuses consensus with wisdom. He thinks being seen is enough, even if he's seen as something he's not. Nietzsche would call this a death of the soul, a slow erosion of fire, because the man who suppresses his convictions for comfort doesn't just lose his voice, he loses his will, his clarity, his edge. And without that, he's not a man. He's a ghost with a calendar and a bank account, hoping his productivity will cover the hole in his chest. And yet, this is what society now applauds. Hollow compliance, masked conformity, emotional sterilization. Men who smile on cue, nod on command, cry when it's fashionable, and never ask, why the hell am I doing this?
Because if they did, if they truly stopped and asked, they might realize they've betrayed themselves at every turn. They might realize they spent years being liked and not one day being free. And that realization, that's where the choice comes in. Burn the script or keep pretending. Most won't burn it. Nietzsche knew that. He was brutally honest about the hurt. He said most men don't want truce. They want safety. They want to be told they're good boys. They want soft hands to cradle their shame and soft words to explain away their fear. But the ones who do burn it, the ones who risk the loneliness of self-respect, they become dangerous, not to others, to the system. Because they can't be bribed with compliments. They can't be manipulated with shame. They've seen the trick. They stepped off the stage. And from that place, they no longer seek to be approved. They seek to be true.
And this is where it all cracks open. Because once a man stops needing permission to exist, the world doesn't quite know what to do with him. He becomes unpredictable, unmanageable, unbothered. Not in a careless way, but in a way that reveals how deeply he's untethered himself from the games others still depend on. Nietzsche understood that kind of man. He called him the Übermensch. Not a tyrant, not a caricature of dominance, but a man who had overcome the inner tyranny of needing to be liked. A man who had suffered through the collapse of all illusions and come out the other side, not bitter, not broken, but awake. And awakening in this sense is violent. Not outwardly, but internally. It rips out everything you were told to be, everything you thought made you good, safe, acceptable, and forces you to ask, what if I was never meant to be any of it? This is why Nietzsche's truth burns, especially for modern men. Because we were raised not to lead, but to comply. Not to face truth, but to navigate feelings. We were trained to believe that our worth lies in how easily we can be digested by others. And so we become small, shapeless. We shave off our edges to fit into a culture that demands roundness. No sharp truths, no hard lines, just soft language and softer spines. And then we wonder why we feel lost, why our relationships feel transactional, why our passions feel muted, why our very presence feels like a performance. The answer? Because we've abandoned the one thing that made us men in the first place, the will to define ourselves, even if it costs us everything. Nietzsche's confession about weak men wasn't a condemnation, it was a warning, a challenge. He wasn't mocking, he was daring you to see how much of your life has been shaped by fear, masquerading as virtue. How many choices you've made not because they were right, but because they were safe. How many truths you've silenced because someone else might disapprove. And most of all, how much of your identity is a costume you've worn for applause. But costumes, no matter how convincing, are not skin. And eventually, the weight of pretending becomes heavier than the fear of being real. Here's the brutal truth Nietzsche handed you like a blade. Until you kill the weak man within, you will never truly live. As long as your choices are ruled by the need to be accepted, admired, included, you are not free. You are rented. And rented men do not build. They do not create. They do not love. They perform. They repeat lines written by others. And the world claps, yes, but claps for a lie. And deep down, you know it. That's why you can have success and still feel hollow. That's why you can be praised and still feel unseen, because the man they love isn't you. It's the mask. And the tragedy is, you're the one who put it on.
So what now? What does Nietzsche demand of you? Not perfection, not dominance, but authenticity at any cost. He dares you to be hated for your truth rather than loved for your mask. To build a life not based on how many people approve, but on whether your soul does. And that journey, God, it's brutal. Because you will lose people. You will be misunderstood. The soft herd will call you hard. The fragile will call you dangerous. The broken will say you lack empathy. But what they're really saying is this: you make me aware of the parts of me
I have never had the courage to face. You become a mirror, and most people hate mirrors that don't flatter. But some, just a few, will respect you, will rise to meet you, will thank you for refusing to play small so they could feel tall. And more importantly, you will respect you. You will wake up not wondering who you need to be today to be loved. You'll wake up already knowing, not perfectly, but honestly. And that honesty, that is where real strength begins. Not in muscle, not in charm, in self-possession, in the audacity to look the world in the eye and say, I will not trade my truth for your approval. Nietzsche wasn't trying to turn you into a monster. He was trying to rescue you from one, the monster of conformity, of false humility, of learned helplessness. And if you make it to the other side, if you kill the weak man within and resurrect the honest one, you'll understand why so few choose this path. Because it's hard, it's lonely, and it's liberating beyond words. But from that place, love becomes real. Purpose becomes clear. Brotherhood becomes sacred. And freedom becomes more than an idea. It becomes your birthright finally claimed. So if this spoke to the part of you that's tired of pretending, that's done with approval chasing, that's ready to be forged, not flattered, don't scroll past. Sit with this. Let it wreck you. Let it strip you bare, because that's where it begins. And when you're ready, really ready, stand up, not for applause, but for yourself. Nietzsche is dead, but the challenge he left is still alive. The only question is, are you?